Thanks for tuning in to Product Chats. On today's episode, I talk with John Slocum, who is the SVP of Product at 3Play Media, and we talk about prioritization and strategy. So hope you enjoy the show, and don't forget to leave us a review. Hey, John, thanks so much for coming on today.
Sure, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, in a minute or less, can you tell us about yourself?
I am a product lead at 3Play Media. Joined there about 2 years ago to lead the product function and build the team. I've been in product for about 14 years prior to that. Originally an engineer. I'll tell people I'm still a recovering engineer at this point. That's the approach that I take to a lot of the problems that we get to see in the space. And I've really been a serial product manager across a variety of different verticals. So 3Play Media is in video accessibility, digital accessibility. Prior to that, I was in the ad tech space. I was in IT software before that and CAD software prior to that. So I've seen a few different tech verticals and am able to bring a transferable product skill set from vertical to vertical, which has been really cool.
Great. And on that note, right, you said you started out as an engineer. So let's talk about kind of like what skill set has really worked for you as an engineer that's played to your strengths in the past 14 years of being in product.
Oh, yeah. Pivot tables. Really. That's it. That's my secret. Taking a data-driven approach to understanding problems and really seeking to quantify problems where we can. We can't always do that, but we can always get some data. And we can generally use that to help us make decisions. And, where we can do so objectively, we'll generally have a lot more confidence in the decisions that we're making. That's been super helpful. That's straight from engineering, right? We want to be able to calculate the answer and have confidence in that answer. That's easier in engineering situations, and then we can validate that experimentally in marketing situations and go to market. We have to be comfortable with some fuzzy math. That was one of the hurdles that I had to overcome as I was, becoming a product manager from being an engineer.
Yeah. And I think with that, you talk about data a little bit, and I think everyone wants to be very data driven, and there's this kind of fine balance of using the data, but also making sure that you're not so married to the data and having bias around that data that you're like, oh, we must build out something this way. It's like, no, let's take a step back and understand our customers and then look at the data and marry those two things together versus just, hey, let's take a look at the data. And what if that's wrong, right? Or what if it doesn't give you kind of the, a lot of times we just have that bias around data. And so it's, hey, let's actually take a step back. So I'm curious about how do you use data to really leverage and make sure that you're building out the right things and building the right products?
Yeah, that's a great point too. If you're just following the data and you're not sanity checking, you're probably going to make some strange decisions because you're never going to get all the variables, right? One of the first things that I do when I start a new role in a new vertical, and my knowledge may be limited in that vertical upon joining 3Play Media, I didn't know a ton about video accessibility specifically. I was in the ad tech space, so I knew media. Generally, I knew advertising really well. I knew data. What I will try to do is get to know some of the customers in the space, spend some time with customers, spend some time with prospects, and I'll go after data that helps paint a picture of the market space, of the segments in the market that the organization is focused on or that the organization might want to focus on. And by getting that data, that helps me establish my gut feel, right? As a product manager, helps me kind of ground my instincts, anchor my instincts in my understanding of the customer. So that might be an understanding of the customer's priorities, their needs, an understanding of the solutions in the space, and the degree to which those solutions are addressing the customer's needs. They can be satisfied with those solutions or dissatisfied, and that suggests a focus area where we might want to invest. But there's, that's pointing us, the data is pointing us to where we want to go do more qualitative research to better understand a problem space, and then think about creatively, with the engineers, put the engineer hat on, think about creatively what solutions might start to address those pain points or those needs that we're learning about.
So you talked about like data, you talked about like figuring out what the customer wants. So you have all these ideas, right? When you're building things out, let's talk a bit about prioritization and kind of what goes into that for you when you're building out products.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into that for sure. And the challenge in prioritization, this is really can be quite an acute challenge for larger organizations. It's challenging for smaller organizations too, where prioritization can be survival for a startup, right? And looking for ways to start driving traction in a market space, to start driving revenue. Then incremental prioritization in that smaller environment can be a little bit simpler than in a large organization, but ultimately everybody wants to prioritize. Everybody should be aligned on prioritizing for business value out of a set of candidates that might go into a roadmap. And lots of people think about business value in different ways. And so what I've been focused on, what I've been finding has worked well with the product teams that I've worked with in recent years is really focus on an ROI score, really a proxy for return on investment for some work that we might do. So we'll actually try to estimate the new revenue enabled by a roadmap candidate or revenue protected by a roadmap candidate. Or on the back end side, or if we're considering IT focused projects, we might look at cost savings enabled by a bit of work that we might do. Or we might look at future cost savings or cost avoidance. So that would be risk avoidance. And in this way, if we're able to score everything that we're considering in prioritization, we then have a consistent mechanism that helps inform the decisions we're making in prioritization. So we're not beholden to the scores that we're creating, but they are decision support, which can be pretty great. And then, that prompts all sorts of interesting conversations around the assumptions that we're making in calculating and estimating these scores. And that's where we push. That's where we have the conversation. And by the way, that's where we bring the data back in too, right? So that'll support those conversations.
So with that, right, I think something that's probably played to your advantage as like starting out as an engineer is understand the effort, because it's so important to like build out products that aren't going to take too much effort. And then you kind of fail and you've spent all this time on building a big product. So I think let's talk a little bit about making fast decisions and how you kind of like enable that.
Yeah. So effort's a big part of the equation, right? If you're thinking about an ROI score, your effort is going to be your denominator. And, you could develop a capability that is worth $50,000 to the organization. And if it takes you 6 months to build, you might not really be interested in pursuing that, right? If it takes you a week to build, it's a lot more attractive. Knowing that effort, having a feel for that effort requires a really strong partnership with your engineering, with your development team, right? You have to be able to trust them. They need to be able to trust product and understand the context of the problem that we're trying to solve, understand the requirements to the extent that design is involved, understand the user experience and specifically what we're asking for. And then, that quick feedback loop, this will be 1 week, that'll be 2 months. I need 2 weeks to even scope the problem to give you a level of effort back, right? That's kind of how we enable that fast understanding of what a set of roadmap candidates might take to deliver.
And you bring up a great point around just collaborating and involving like engineering, involving design, keeping everyone kind of involved in the process rather than product saying, hey, we're going to build this and then getting people involved. It's, hey, let's work together throughout the process so that obviously we're all working towards these objectives and these goals, right? You talked about revenue or cost savings, right? You're all working towards these goals. So it's just about, hey, let's work together with teams and keep teams very involved so that we don't get to the end of it and we're like, hey, we need to build this out. And then an engineer says, wait, that's going to take me 6 months. And so it kind of throws a wrench in what you're trying to build.
Yeah. Yeah, that back to the partnership. And I just came out of Q2 roadmap planning, right? And that had the entire product team there, all the product managers on the team. We had the technical leads involved, and everybody's looking at the same set of roadmap candidates in the plan across multiple teams. And we're all agreeing with each other that we understand what we're asking for, and we have a plan to get there, generally, more or less, right? It's not always the case, right? There is ambiguity. Sometimes we know a thing is important and we don't know exactly how we're going to get there. And so we want to spend a little more time there, right? We want to understand the requirements, and we want to start to scope out the approach to delivering the solution that addresses those requirements. And that can be a little more challenging to prioritize relative to a variety of other projects. But if the ambiguous thing is super important, we don't really have a choice but to proceed on that planning path and continue investigating and know that we're going to want to spend time on that. So we have to be comfortable with that too. So getting the best definition in place, getting the shared understanding with our dev partners and anybody, stakeholders involved in the prioritization process is critical, so that we're not going to get to the last week in the quarter, or we're not going to get 4 months down the road and have folks asking questions about, where's this thing, I thought this was coming out.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really great point of, even with the ambiguity, or there's features that you're not exactly sure, functionality you're building out. If you always get back to that why, what is the pain that the customer is dealing with, usually you can connect the dots. I'm guessing it just doesn't always happen organically. It's just, hey, let's think about what challenge is this customer dealing with. And then in a very positive way, there's so many options of the journey you could take to build it, or what can solve that, as long as you keep in mind, hey, customer first, what is the problem that they're dealing with and where are they trying to get to?
Yeah, I love asking that question. And, especially where we may not have great definition on a project, on an effort. And if we stop and take a step back and try to understand what value it is that we're creating for the organization, right? If it's value in the form of a solution for a customer, who's the customer? What's the customer's problem? What do they need? What are we doing to create value for them? How are we creating value? How are we delivering that? And if we can't ask and answer that question in a customer facing feature project, then we probably don't know what we're doing. We probably have more work to do to define the work, to define the development, to define the solution, and then, more work to do to position that to the customer as well, to be able to communicate the value to them. We can ask the same question on back end or infrastructural projects as well. And getting back to prioritization, if we're scoring everything, if we're translating all the major efforts that we're investing in into business value in the form of dollars, and we're struggling to make that translation, then I would challenge anyone to say that we don't actually know why we're doing the project. If we can't identify that business value, let's stop, take a step back, and try to figure it out.
So on that subject of business value, you talked a bit about solutioning. Let's talk about strategy and looking at the problem versus solutioning.
Yeah. Well, we always want to start with the problem, I think, right?
Yeah.
That's the palette for the set of solutions that we might bring to market, that we might decide to invest in. So understanding the problems in space is the it's the first thing I try to do. As I mentioned, the first thing I do when I get into a new vertical, try to understand the problems in the space. What are the common problems to pick market segments? What are the problems that customer A has versus customer B? What segment do they fall in? Try to navigate in the parlance of problems that we might find in a variety of different opportunities that the organization may already be engaged in or is considering engaging in. And so we'll do that typically with research, with voice of customer activities to get out and talk to folks. And then we can work to quantify those problems as well via survey. So we heard these things from this group of customers from this market segment. We can put that into a survey. There are a variety of ways we can do it. We could run an adaptive conjoint analysis, for example, and seek to quantify the importance of problems, the performance of solutions on those problems. We can seek to quantify the utility of features that we might build or bring or deliver in a solution for that market segment. And then we can use that to start to inform our strategy, right? And that's just one element to inform the strategy. We need to have an awareness of the competitive landscape in that particular market segment as well. Because if we're building a variety of solutions that a competitor has already built, they're already established, right? That's going to be a tough road. We have to differentiate somehow, right? We typically don't want to be differentiating on price, especially if we're in the enterprise space.
Yep.
But if we're going, self-serve, high volume, low friction, then, there's a game to be played with price and value delivery that can be very meaningful. So we have to think about those things. We have to think about how our organization is structured to take those solutions to market. Can we be effective with those motions and the solution that we're describing, given our understanding of the customer and given our understanding of the competitive landscape?
So you mentioned, right, like you're figuring out, always going back to the customer, figuring out what the problem the customer has. But how do you, throughout that process, obviously you mentioned user interviews, but how do you, throughout that process, make sure that you're doing the right things or that you're evaluating or reevaluating quickly enough to pivot if you're not doing what's best or the best solution?
That we would do through, we might have some friendly customers advising us. Might have a customer advisory board. We would want to do product concept testing in that case. So, we understand what it is that we think we want to build reasonably well. Perhaps we've built some of it, right? We may not even have gotten that far. We might be mocking it up. We might be selling PowerPoint slides. But product concept testing can be pretty low effort there, where, we have enough to describe the solution. We take it to a customer and ask them what they think, right? Get their feedback. We might even try to sell it to them, right? And see if we can get a credit card number. See if we can get a check and sell the thing in advance. Actually asking for the sale in product concept testing can really get some honest responses out of the customer. Because a lot of the time, if you're taking a concept to a customer, sure, that's great, love it, that's neat. Yeah, I'm interested. But when you're asking for the payment, that really flips the switch, and now they're really thinking about exchanging money for the concept that's in front of them. So that can take it to another stage. We love doing that, and important to do that early and often in the product development cycle to get the feedback as early as possible. I would say if you're getting that product concept feedback later, maybe in a closed beta or beta stage, then it's too late. You've already built it. You've already invested in building, and obviously you can enhance, you can shift your focus, you can pivot. But if you've invested in development already, it's too late.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a great point about actually customers wanting to pay, because you can build out great products that customers say, this is exciting, I really like this. But at the end of the day, if it doesn't convert, and in some businesses, right, it may not be dollars, it may be some other conversion. But if it's not working towards your conversion goals, then you probably shouldn't build out. And so I think you bring up a great point of like, hey, would you buy this? Right? We haven't, and you also haven't spent a ton of effort in it to be like, okay, well, we build out and now you won't buy it. Great. But you have that feedback of, would you actually pay money for that? And I think that's just like aligning back to company goals and making sure you're, like you mentioned before, staying connected to those objectives of like, hey, is this going to drive more revenue or is this going to save costs, and making sure that can align to that. So you're working towards those company goals.
Yeah. That, if we're selling some PowerPoint slides and we're early in the program here and it's a flop, no sweat, right?
Yeah.
We haven't spent a ton. We're just out in the market learning. We can also test licensing. We can test price points. We can get feedback on that. Maybe the product's right, but maybe the licensing is not right, right? Maybe we're proposing in this product concept test a licensing scheme that the customer doesn't really have control over, right? If it's event-based pricing licensing model, and the customer isn't the one driving the events, and maybe their customers are. I'm speaking to a current project I'm working on, but if they don't have control over that and the ability to budget it, they may not be comfortable investing in it. They probably aren't. It's uncommon for a customer to say, yeah, sure, I'll buy the thing, and I'm not really sure what I'm going to spend on it, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Right? And it's kind of silly. We wouldn't expect a lot of success there, but that's the opportunity to get that feedback, right? Like, customer might say, I want to buy this. I can't budget for it the way that you're selling it, the way that you're pricing it. And then even price point, right? It's the licensing model's right, but the price point's a little bit too high. Never heard anyone say it's too low. And if it's free or cheap, that the customer is getting what they're paying for. So, you want to think about your branding too. If you're a premium enterprise brand, you want to price as such, make sure that you're landing where the customer expects you to be.
And I think a lot of that is like asking open-ended questions of like, why do you feel this way? And getting ideas rather than saying like, do you think this is a good pricing model? It's, hey, what do you think about this? Right? And getting those open-ended questions, because a lot of times customers will open up and say, oh, I feel this way. And you'll get more information than you would have gotten with like a very pointed question. You can say why, and getting deeper to that why, right?
Yeah, for sure. And that, that speaks to a lot of interview technique that we train for. If you're asking yes or no questions, you're going to get yes or no answers. And then let the customer lead, right? Let the customer lead the conversation. If you ask an open-ended question, you never know where you're going to go. And it could be a lot of fun. So just, buckle up and go along for the ride. But then, drill in where you want to get your feedback, or, where you're going to a place that perhaps you hadn't thought of as a product person. Pull on that thread, right? Follow the customer's lead, and they'll tell you all sorts of things that you probably hadn't even thought of, because customers do know what they want, right? Like there's a misconception out there that customers don't know what they want. They do. They totally do. And they can tell you if you're asking the right questions. They may not know how to build it, how to get it, how to spec it, but they can certainly articulate what they're looking for.
So to pivot on that, I want to ask you an open-ended question and ask you, if you were to give one piece of advice to an aspiring product leader, what would it be?
Oh, geez, this feels like a setup now. It's asking the right questions, and that, right? Like I've been thinking about this as well. It is asking the right questions for an aspiring product manager, for a new product manager, for an experienced product manager, right? We have to take a step back and think about what we need to know in order to make the right decisions. And, we're making all sorts of decisions all the time, and we want to make them efficiently, and we want to make them correctly more often than not. We'll get some wrong. That's okay. And then we have to ask ourselves why we missed. What did we miss? What questions didn't we ask that we could have asked that would have led us down the right path? And so this is how I learned product management as well. I had a great mentor when I started in product management at SolidWorks. That was my first gig out of engineering and into product management. And so my mentor there kept asking what I thought I needed to know to make the right decision on a product that I was suddenly in charge of, that I was managing at the time. And so he'd ask me that question, and I would say, I need to know how many content publishers are out there that are interested in a self-service content publishing tool. And he'd say, great, how are you going to answer that question? And so I had to ask myself another question. How am I going to answer that question? Right? I probably need to go find some content publishers that fit in our target market. And then I need to think about how I can contact them, how I can get in touch with them. Then I need to think about the actual question that I'm going to ask them, or questions that I'm going to ask them. And then I need to think about what they're probably going to respond with, and how I can capture that in a way that answers my question selfishly.
Great. And then on that note of leadership, what roles are you hiring for?
So hiring for a technical product manager with the data. We're doing a ton of things with data at 3Play Media, and our platform exhausts a tremendous amount of data that. We have a machine learning team focused on some data science efforts that are continuously making our operation more efficient, producing higher quality in our output. We want, that team and other functions with a technical product manager who is focused on getting the most out of our data. We're working with some BI tools. We're working on the data warehouse efforts. And we need someone to take that and drive it. I'm passionate about it myself, but I, can't do all the things that, we're excited about doing. So we got to bring somebody in to drive that for us. That'll be a fun one.
Very exciting. Well, on that note, where can people connect with you?
Connect with me on LinkedIn primarily. I'm pretty active there, available, I'm responding to messages. So, reach out there. I'm at 3Play Media as well. So look us up. We're building out a variety of digital accessibility capabilities. We just acquired a Caption Max and NCC organizations. And so we're integrating them, getting to know the teams there and getting to know their customers. So, there's a ton going on at 3Play, and, I'm over at LinkedIn. So come say hi.
Perfect. Well, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you.
Thanks again to John for coming on today's episode of Product Chats. If you want more product management resources, head over to canny.io/blog, and we'll see you next time.